Really what we've done is we've taken a naturally barely livable planet and we've made it unnaturally livable, largely using fossil fuels. And so if you recognize that, then you're going to be optimistic about the future. And fortunately, all the facts I'm citing about the current state of the planet, those are undeniable. The only people who deny it or distort it, they are either ignorant or they're not looking at the planet from a pro-human perspective. They're looking at it from an anti-human impact perspective.
Alex, I wonder if I can get you with your philosopher's hat on, first of all, to explain for our viewers where you think what I would describe as a religious zealotry almost of the green movement actually comes from. Because you see the way in which Extinction Rebellion, they're dressing up their activists in costumes with face paint. You know the way in which the young icon in Greta Thunberg announces apocalyptic world-ending scenarios like the world perishing in a ball of flames or we all drown in a flooded planet. The West, increasingly secularized as it is, has shaken off Christianity. Do you put this all down to the sort of, is it a new religion, the religion of the green, explained through, I think, people looking for something bigger than themselves because there's that God-shaped hole in society? Or is that far too deep, Alex? Where are you at on that?
Well, so there are a couple of questions. So one is like, is it a religion or is it similar to a religion? And then there's also the question of like why it's taking hold and is it inevitable if you're not religious, if you're not explicitly religious, to have this kind of secret religion. So I'm not religious myself, and I'm even less green than I am religious. I mean, I'm the most non-green person in the world. If you understand what green means, which is really eliminating human impact on Earth, and I regard that as a basically anti-human idea. But I do think it's a good observation. So part of it, it takes a little bit to prove to somebody that it is a religion because it poses as scientific, and I think we're going to get into some of the details that will really show that it's a religion. But I think the things you mentioned at least have the trappings of religion.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, there's a basic hell narrative that's very binary. So it's like we do the wrong thing. We, quote, caused climate change, we impacted the climate. And then, like, we're going to hell, right? The world is going to become this hellish place, with the implication that if we hadn't impacted it, it would be this good place. And when you're talking about climate, this should be very, very suspicious, because if you know anything about climate from experience, it is a very dynamic, diverse, and dangerous phenomenon, right? I mean, it's something that has murdered human beings throughout history. It's made it difficult when it's not going well. It makes it difficult for us to grow our crops. It kills us in all sorts of ways. So when quote the climate has this godlike deified status, you can be pretty sure that you're looking at something that's religious in nature, really primitive, religious in nature. And then also on the flip side, when you have this idea of it's going to be unlivable, that should also be very suspicious. Like, oh, it's because you think like, what is actually going to happen? Like, what could happen plausibly that like, the world would be unlivable? And if you even just use common sense, and this is documented by all the data, like we're clearly far safer from climate than we were even 100 years ago, let alone 300 years ago when we had no impact. I mean, heat waves today are much less of a problem for us. Cold is less of a problem, not primarily because it's a little warmer, just because cold is such a threat and we're good at dealing with it. I mean, we can alleviate drought. Even with wildfires, we can do a lot in terms of building barriers and doing controlled burns and on all this and clearing the forest and logging and stuff. So yeah, I think just those observations, because I don't have time at the moment to get, we'll get in probably more to the
Mm-hmm.
science, but I think it should at least strike people. There's something that's not really scientific about viewing the climate as this godlike, wonderful thing.
Thinking about that deification, I think that's a good way of putting it. Ultimately, and you have been in many debates, more debates than I would be able to count, I'm sure, on this very issue. And it strikes me that they don't know what they want, Alex. They cannot tell you what they want. It basically, it strikes me that it gets down to the point where they won't be happy until we're all walking around in loincloths and living in caves. That will be, the natural environment will be sufficiently
Hmm.
unspoiled at that point.
Right. Yeah, so I think one of the key questions with, I mean, we can say more broadly a philosophy or religion is a type of
Hmm.
philosophy that has elements that are, faith that you can't demonstrate, but it's a type of philosophy. So part of any philosophy is what do you think is the like ultimate or primary moral goal? What are you going after? When it comes to our relationship with the rest of nature, which is really the kind of question that's raised with climate change, like the primary moral goal of the green movement, and I think of most people unknowingly, is eliminating our impact on Earth. Because that's
Hmm.
really what green
Yeah.
means. Now I have a green shirt, but it says, I don't know if people can see, it says I love fossil
Fossil
fuels.
fuels, yeah.
So so people consider that ironic, although fossil fuels do make the world greener in many many ways, and they encourage life, which is that's what green should be associated with. But really, if you look
Yeah.
at the idea of green, it really means eliminate our impact, and the greenest Earth from that perspective is the Earth that would exist had humans never existed. So when you're talking about, oh, it's going to be us in loincloths, yeah, it's basically us. Either we don't exist or we exist like all the other animals, so that our and all the other species, so that there's nothing, there's you can't tell that we were here basically, besides observing us, like we're having no impact. And I think and part of what rationalizes this, because if you think about it for a second, well, we survive and flourish by impacting the earth a lot, right? I
Hmm.
mean, we didn't impact the earth 200 years ago and before, and life was really terrible by our
Yeah.
standards now.
Hmm.
And that should really strike people. When I was 18, this was the biggest breakthrough I had that was related to energy. This was 9 years before I learned about energy, but I learned that the green movement believes that our goal should be to eliminate our impact on Earth and human beings survive by intelligently impacting Earth. And just that
Yeah.
juxtaposition of the goal and being exactly against our means of survival made me think, oh, this is an evil anti-human movement. And it really struck me. I mean, I was at this pretty prestigious school in the US called Duke University. I almost got kicked out as a freshman because I was so passionate about this issue.
Well, speaking of the damage that could be done, if the green movement is a religion, or if it's a philosophical belief at least, then COP26 should have been the holy Mecca, right? But instead,
Yeah.
instead it saw protests. It saw Greta Thunberg saying blah blah blah. It saw one of our government ministers, believe it or not, sobbing as he apologised for the watered down deal on coal that was presented as the end product of 2 weeks of conference of £100 million sterling wasted, and God only knows how much private jet fuel pumped into the atmosphere just to make it all happen. Do you think COP26 achieved anything at all other than exposing world leaders as hypocrites, Alex?
Well, I think the conventional view that people would expect from me is to say, oh, like it was a failure because they didn't get what they wanted. But I really want to at least, not that people have to agree with my perspective, but I really do believe it's like a Nazi conference in the sense of this is incredible. I mean, what they're talking about is eliminating our impact on the earth, specifically climate, and eliminating fossil fuel use in less than 30 years. And I regard fossil fuel use as completely indispensable to the amazing way of life that we have today. And so I view eliminating that as making the world unlivable for 8 billion people. So as the worst apocalyptic scenario for the climate catastrophist, that's what I view reality if their policies are implemented. So when the policies are that evil and that destructive, my attitude is not, oh, you only got a quarter of what you wanted, ha ha
Hmm.
ha. It's like, oh, you got a quarter of what you wanted. This, let's sound the alarm bells. You should be kicked out. Nobody should be paying attention to you. And I think you saw I had this interview that got some circulation on GB News,
Yeah.
and I was like very emphatic. I view it as the world should be expanding energy use. Especially there are billions of poor people. I mentioned this fact 3 billion people use less electricity than a typical American refrigerator. Like the world needs so much more energy. There's no other way to provide it in the near term on that scale besides fossil fuels, particularly because we've criminalized nuclear. And so I think the world needs more fossil fuels going forward. And I believe it'll make it a little bit warmer and a lot better overall. So people are saying, I'm saying this is what's required for life. And they're saying, let's do the exact opposite and eliminate everything that supports life. So yeah, I'm happy they didn't get anywhere near what they wanted, but I'm very unhappy that this is the direction, and it's viewed as a failure that they didn't get what they wanted.
Response to that, though, would be that, well, you're just ignoring all of the data. You're ignoring clear, hard facts. You're ignoring the problems with, we look across, you're in California right now, yes?
Yes.
You look at
Yeah.
wildfires, and in Australia, wildfires and all these other things.
Yeah.
How can you ignore all of these things where people fear places, nations even being lost, wildlife, species made extinct?
Mhm.
What would your response be? I know you've answered that question many, many times before,
No, no,
but that would be the
I'm
response.
yeah, I think that would be the response. And I'd say, like, I'm happy to consider those things, but I forget how you put it, but something like, oh, what about the facts? I would say, is the discussion considering, the fact that low cost, reliable energy is crucial to human life? People desperately lack it around the world. Fossil fuels has a unique ability to provide it. After generations of competition, it still provides 80% of the world's energy, including even more of the world's transportation energy and industrial heat energy. And we're talking about eliminating it in less than 30 years, largely in favor of solar and wind, which are today are total, this is a fact, they're total parasites on solar and wind. They don't exist independently in a freestanding way anywhere on Earth, not even close to it. So we're talking about getting rid of our leading source of energy. Energy is something that's desperately needed. And we're talking about replacing it with something that is a total parasite that where it's used is driving up prices, but in any case can't be self-sufficient. Isn't that a relevant fact that even agriculture, 8 billion people depend on fossil fueled agriculture, both fertilizer and all the amazing machines powered by largely diesel? Like, why isn't that being considered? So I just want to point out there's a huge constellation of facts about life and death issues connected to fossil fuels that even the smart people are not discussing at all. And so within that context, yeah, we can consider, are there negative side effects? You have to look at the benefits, but are there negative side effects in terms of, I think you mentioned wildfires, and what were the other ones?
Wildfires, species going extinct. These would be the sort of the rhetoric
Yeah,
that
so
would be pushed back.
okay, well, let's do. I mean, species going extinct. There's a question of how concerned are you about human life with that one, but the wildfires, yeah. So, I mean, we kind of know that wildfire damage to humans, in terms of the threat of death, at least, is far less than it used to be. And we know that there are many places in the world that are not having wildfire problems at all. And so, if we look at particular places like where I live in California and Australia, what we see is actually the green religion is dominating in a very obvious and preventable way. Namely, they are not allowing us to manage our forests by sufficiently clearing the amount of what's called fuel load. So we've basically prohibited logging. We don't allow good brush clearing. We don't do controlled burns. So essentially, in the name of leaving the forest natural, we turn it into this giant bomb. That's totally preventable. That would be a problem if it were 3 degrees cooler or 3 degrees warmer. If we're 3 degrees warmer and we properly manage the forests, including things like building barriers, there's no way we would have, how could we possibly have huge wildfire problems? Like, nobody has ever explained to me how, if you properly manage the forests, wildfires of all things can overwhelm humans. They only overwhelm humans if you make the forest into a bomb. Yeah, and then you try to fight it with water and planes. That doesn't work. And so what you find with all of these things, all of these alleged problems, is that in each area, fossil fuels have actually made the situation better around the world. And that's another fact that's not acknowledged. And so I cite a lot the fact that our climate related disaster deaths, so from things like wildfires, extreme heat, extreme cold, drought, etc., those are down 98% over the last 100 years, which means that you and I, or really anyone in the world, including the poor world, has 1 in 50 the chance of dying from a climate related disaster than we did 100 years ago. So actually, we're having a climate renaissance. And the reason people can't see it goes back to what you asked about at the beginning, this green religion, where they think because we've impacted the climate, it's a bad climate and it must be punishing us. Whereas in reality, yeah, we've impacted the climate a little bit. It's 1 degree warmer than it was 170 years ago. That's not necessarily good or bad. There are pros and cons to that. But what we've really developed is an incredible ability to master climate and more broadly master our environment. And that's why the world is a livable place, because we have mastered it through incredible productive ability. And the core of that is all these amazing machines that expand and amplify our productive abilities. And all of those are powered by fossil fuels.
Therefore, then, if you accept there will be warming, and if you accept, continued fossil fuel use
Yeah.
to expand and continue human flourishing, do you therefore believe that actually we're focusing on entirely the wrong thing here? And actually, we
Yeah.
should be talking about how we actually manage the planet getting warmer, how we actually deal with these sort of problems, instead of trying to roll back human progress in order to stop the warming in the first place. Is that a fool's errand,
Yeah.
basically?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that it's a fool's errand. I mean, my views in a sense sound extreme, but what I'm describing is what everyone is actually doing. Right? The world is using more fossil fuels. For 30 years it's been saying, yeah, let's get rid of it. But the world is actually using more fossil fuels. So they're basically doing what Alex Epstein is saying. Just nobody is saying that it's moral. They're all saying, oh, what we're doing is evil, and why can't we get everyone to agree to stop doing it? Well, we can't get people to agree because it's basically good for our lives. So I would agree, yes, given what is known and I think established about science, we should expect continuing slow warming. Now, how much of a focus should that be? I don't think very much because it's not all that hard to deal with. And it's something that free people deal with very well. I mean, we have plenty of instances of people dealing with even rising sea levels, which are very, very slow right now, like a foot a century. Even if it's 3 feet a century, we're really good at dealing with stuff like that. I think the biggest place we should be concerned is where government is managing things like forests, because the government will not be adaptable left to its own devices. But in general, the amount of warming we're talking about, I think, is one of the least problems that we're going
Mm.
to have. It's also going to have benefits. So you can think of it, if you don't think of it from a human impact as evil perspective, and you think, oh, it's going to get 1 degree, 2 degrees warmer in the next 100 years or whatever you think of it as, oh, it's a combination of challenges and opportunities. And the more capable we are, the better use we can make of it. There's no even really no such thing in a sense as a negative climate change if you have enough mastery ability. So, for example, is it bad? There are sort of limits to this, but like imagine, snow. Snow
Hmm.
used to be the worst kind of climate danger for people, but now it can be a place where you go snowboarding. So you turn a threat into an opportunity. Or I like to use the example, a storm, like a storm that could just devastate a house 200 years ago can be the romantic setting for a date now. So the more mastery we have, the more we can take the raw material of climate and move it to our advantage. It's another reason why our focus should really be on empowering the world, driving progress, liberating humanity. The warming side effects of our key source of energy should very much be a footnote.
Then where do you think we're going wrong as far as the energy mix is concerned? Because in this country, for example, we're starting to uh, accept nuclear more. Nuclear is receiving, certainly small scale reactors are receiving planning permission and go aheads from our local authorities and indeed central authority. But shale gas, for example, is completely banned, right?
Right.
Do you think that there
Yep.
are so many ways in which we are, well, actually making things a hell of a lot more difficult for ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear that you understand this. I think I mean, basically what's happening is we're saying we have this green religion. So what it says is it's wrong to impact the planet. And sort of the most obvious version of that is it's wrong to impact the climate. So anything that has any impact on climate, we just shouldn't do, whatever the cost is. That's what net zero means. It means eliminate our impact on climate at all cost. And people even who are against net zero have no idea of the cost, because
No.
net zero is not something anyone in the world has done ever in a scalable way. So we're nowhere near anyone being able to do it. So even with all these costs, it's good you're talking about the cost, but it's like, what's the cost of cutting off half of everyone's bodies? People have no in that near term. So we have fossil fuels restricted, but nuclear has also been criminalized, and hydro around the world, including the U.S., is very restricted, and it's all because we believe it's wrong to impact nature. And so with nuclear, what this does is it leads to a level of regulation and fear that doesn't make any sense, and that makes it cost prohibitive. So it's good that in the UK and the rest of Europe, we're talking about nuclear. It's starting to get on the table after 40 years of opposition, leaving aside France and some of Sweden. But it needs to be liberated. Right now, it's nothing resembling a free market. And so what you're going to see is under these policies, it's going to come nowhere near what natural gas can do, except you're not even allowing natural gas to do what natural gas can do. So in the US, we have more freedom, definitely inadequate for natural gas. But what's really needed is just liberating energy around the world from the political shackles imposed by the green religion. Just getting rid of this idea that it's wrong for us to impact the planet and embrace the idea that we should be advancing human flourishing by intelligently impacting the planet.
Well, I mean, in my opinion, one of the most successful totemic, in my opinion. You can hold it up and wave it about as a really, really key important part of what Margaret Thatcher did. You know, John Major following on as Prime Minister after her, in the liberalisation of the energy market, electricity in particular. But what we're doing now is slapping on 25% taxes and saying, all right, there's your green tax. There's your environmental levy. We're making things a hell of a lot harder for those who it hits disproportionately, who are those at the very bottom. So it's always been I completely agree with what you're saying there. It's always been a source of real frustration for me that we would do that to those at the very bottom who pay disproportionately more out of their pay packets toward energy than anyone else. But yeah,
Can I ask you a question?
absolutely.
I'm very curious because it's you began this interview in a way I found very interesting, and you wanted to talk about like the green religion element. So I'm curious, you're a young guy. What caused you to question particularly the environmental portion of this? Because what I find is even many people who tend to be pro free market, they're often hung up and they're like, yeah, I'm pro free market, but we need a carbon tax and we need to. So I'm curious if you could just summarize your journey.
Absolutely. I mean, and if you think my earliest memory of talking about climate change would have been in, I think, 2004 when the Day After Tomorrow, the film.
Uh
They
huh.
sort of, at school, I kid you not, they wheeled back in the days of wheeled televisions and wheeled a television through and made us sit and watch this film and be like, okay, that's what's going to happen to the planet. Now, of course, when that didn't happen to the planet, because it keeps changing every 2 minutes, it's a bit like our National Health Service here in Britain. We keep being told that we've got 24 hours to pump another few billion quid into it before it keels over. Well, we keep being told that the planet's got another 2 days to go or whatever it is. And then, we'll all be drowning underwater and all the rest of it. So I guess the steady signs of things not being as bad as they are, and I think actually, I guess watching so I grew up in quite a working class family, and watching the way in which energy bills have
Mm.
increased and the way in which that has been as a direct result of really stupid environmental policies. In this country, I can give you a very few quick examples. Under the European Union, we said, okay, goody goody, get some diesel cars. Then we said, oh no, wait a minute, diesel cars poison people. The environment is poisoned. We must ban diesel cars. So the working class people that had bought diesel vans, for example, are then told, well, actually, matey, what we're going to do is tax you prohibitively to prohibit your use of your livelihood. That is your livelihood. That van is what you use to make your family's life better or livable, right? And then burning wood pellets. We said, okay, well, renewable wood pellets, let's burn those. And now we're saying, actually, deforestation is a really bad thing, so let's roll back on that as well. And of course, the reverse ferret on everything from nuclear. I could go on and on. Wind, for example, the wind turbines. I couldn't tell you how many we've got here that we are paying, out of if I consider my own energy bills, paying to literally have them turn them off because we have no means of battery storage to actually, be able to. And even when the wind isn't blowing, we're then saying, okay, well, what are we going to do now, matey? It got to the point where I think there were 2 days of energy use, and then we would have actually had to turn off the lights in Britain quite recently. And when you start to hear about that sort of thing, to me, it just seems like it's psychosis. It is a collapse in the sort of, I think, reason and rationality. So that's where I'm at. But my view is a very unpopular one, Alex, I'm afraid.
I don't know. I feel like I'm getting so much interest from the UK right now, and part of what I'm enjoying about it is I'm getting kind of a biased sample. The BBC reached out to me the other day, so maybe they'll interview me soon on one of their
Yeah,
networks.
they will not
What
be
I
saying what
like,
I'm saying, put it that way.
yeah, yeah. I just need them to let me say something. I don't
Yes.
care what they say. But I part of what I enjoy is it's more like the formats tend to be more intellectual. So even on GB News, it's just funny. We were having this nuclear discussion, and I think it was supposed to go 10 or 15 minutes, but the host was really enjoying it and found it interesting. And so then it went 21 minutes. This would never happen on a television network in the US. Like there's no you could announce like the most miraculous discovery and be like, we're going to commercial right now. We had our 3 minute segment. So it's cool to be able to talk to people and hopefully some of the perspectives I'm sharing in terms of the philosophy and also some of the specific facts empower those of you in the UK, because I think you are, I mean, you are debating these issues, and you're a little
Yeah.
bit further down the line of suffering
Mhm.
from the consequences of the green movement. So yeah, I'm hoping I can help with some change there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I wonder then if I guess the best way to combat and bring about change would be to banish some of the myths. So let's go through a few of them. If we consider the fact that, you've already mentioned this, you've touched on it, but if we consider extreme weather, that's not my
Mm-hmm.
language, that's their language, being on the rise, would you argue it absolutely isn't on the rise? Or would you say, yes, we are experiencing more extreme weather, but we're dealing with it better?
So just remember, everything I view in the context of like fossil fuels are the ultimate life-saving medication. So they're the reason, I mean, we have plentiful food and we're safe from things in the first place. I just want people to keep, because I think that's the main thing, is
Yeah.
understanding the benefits of fossil fuels to what I would call human flourishing. And then you look at these things as potential negative side effects, but you look at them without the anti-human bias that A, they're all bad if we impact the world, and then B, it's catastrophic. And so with extreme weather, what you see is a variety of opinions, but none of them are resembling catastrophe, because our ability to master climate and the increase in that is so much greater than any increase in extreme weather. And you just think like common sense. Okay, planet's been around for a long time. We've had 10 times the amount of CO2. We've had in Celsius 12 degrees warmer temperatures. These were some of the lushest periods in the planet's history. We are a tropical species, so we're certainly you, but even I are in places that are too cold for us in terms of what our bodies are used to. So, like, was it really true that, and we're talking about, okay, CO2 has gone from 0.03% of the atmosphere, 0.027% to 0.042%. So it's gone up 50%, but it's still 1/10 of what it was. Is it really true that, oh, it's going to go up another 0.01% and everything's going to collapse? Like, doesn't that sound like a religious hell narrative versus reality? What you should
Mm.
expect is that if we put more CO2 in the atmosphere, it's technically called an infrared absorber. So you'll have some warming, and then that will have some other climate consequences, some of which will probably be good. Like in general, warmer planet is a wetter planet. And in general, more water is good, particularly if you have mastery, you can manipulate it and deal with it. And there might be more intense storms, although there's counter arguments there, but they're not going to be 5 times more intense. They're not even going to be 2 times. It makes no sense that, oh, this amount of warming, everything's just going to become a devil climate. And so I want to give people this perspective that when you hear that we've had an impact on the earth and it's all bad and the world is going to end, is essentially impossible. That is a scientific conclusion. It's a primitive religious
Mm.
conclusion. Yeah. So like the statistics about extreme weather, you'll hear some I mean, those are mostly predictions because there's not much trend documented so far as we've increased CO2. But it's something like, oh well, storms will become um, on the order of like 10% more frequent, or no, they'll become a little less frequent and a little more intense. But like, okay, again, this is so trivial compared to everything else that matters in the world. We still have like almost a billion people who have essentially no electricity
Yeah.
right now. I mean, we have babies dying every day because they don't have incubators, because they don't have ultrasound machines that can test for different kinds of problems. Like the world today, and I think your background helps coming from working class background, like the world today is so poor and there's so much preventable suffering that can be alleviated through freedom and industrialization, and that's going to require fossil fuels. And we're talking about, oh, is there going to be one more hurricane a year or something, or is it going to be 10% more intense? It's just such a bizarre focus. So yeah, the individual thing, exaggeration is not true, but the whole focus is off.
So then, what do you say to those who say, well, we've found a way to reduce our CO2 emissions, and that was
Uh-huh.
through the billions of people around the world being told that they have to, the state mandates that they have to lock themselves away behind their home and not come out unless it's for essential purposes. And that's the way to reduce our CO2 emissions. Do you think climate lockdowns are the way in which we ought to combat climate change?
Is that really a popular view?
It's not
That
I wouldn't say it's a popular view, but it's
I think
definitely one.
it's popular among a certain, so I think this is a, I'll be quick about this, but it's a really revealing thing in many ways that in 2020 a non-trivial amount of our thought leaders in the world were praising to the skies how much better, quote, the Earth was or the planet was when we were suffering massively
Hmm.
from a new virus, and B, lockdown policies that prevented us from living our lives. And it was, what was the view? Oh, the planet has never been so good. The Earth has never been so good. Well, from a human perspective, the Earth was bad because we had a new virus and we weren't free, right? But from their perspective, a good Earth isn't a good Earth for human beings. A good Earth is an unimpacted Earth. So the view is, oh, we're not doing anything. And so that's great. Well, then the logic is, oh, if only it had killed all of us, imagine what a banner year 2020 would have been for the Earth. So I just want to highlight this anti human green religion is totally pervasive in our thought leaders. To just view a tragedy, a tragic year in the world as, oh, it was so great. That's like, that is really perverse. And then you saw a lot of the intellectuals saying, oh, well, if we reduced emissions 10% this year, oh, well, let's just do this more. That's like, how could that be appealing? This showed you how much suffering there was. It showed you we have all these amazing machines, particularly transport machines that we couldn't use. And it sucked. It was bad. And that's nothing compared to what they're asking for. So I think we, the pro-human people, should take this occasion and realize, wow, there's a bunch of powerful people who really have an animus toward human life on this earth and who really have a desire to take power over us at our expense. Notice that they began this green propaganda of solar and wind as, oh, everything's going to be cheaper, right? And now it's sort of gone. There's like, that's, what is that meme on Twitter? Like, how it started, how it's going. It's like, how it started was, oh, we're all going to be richer by fighting global warming. And now it's like, oh no, we're all going to be poorer. And then soon, oh, we all have to die. That's the future. But
I
it's
mean,
like, as they get into this, there's more of an opportunity for us to push back because it's clear their motives are not for us to get rich.
yeah, exactly. I mean, my next question was going to be, can't we just rely on wind and solar? But you've answered that.
Well, but
And
I didn't answer the specific. Just
yeah,
the key thing is maybe one way to bring out how screwed up all this is by bad philosophy is just to ask yourself, what are the facts about the present and what do our thought leaders say about those? So our thought leaders say our climate is worse than ever, even though we're 50 times safer from climate related disasters. They portray the world as bad, even though the world has never been better for human flourishing in terms of like people living on less than $2 a day since I was born in 1980 has gone from more than 4 in 10 to less than 1 in 10. Like the world is so much better in ways that can be traced toward our ability to use fossil machines, and those are powered by fossil fuels. And so whenever somebody misrepresents the present, they cannot be trusted at all to evaluate and predict the future. Predicting the future is hard, even if you're looking at things from the same perspective, like philosophical perspective. But our leaders are clearly looking at it from an anti-human impact perspective, that all of our impact is bad. And that's why they regard the safest climate in history as terrible. So the same is true with energy. If people said, hey, here's the facts about solar and wind, they're 3% of the world's energy. They're totally dependent on fossil fuels. They only work for electricity, which is about 20% of the world's energy. They don't have solutions of any kind really for heavy duty mobility, for industrial heat, et cetera. And the more they're used, the higher prices go up because you have to pay for both the new unreliable energy infrastructure and the reliable energy infrastructure to support it. And if you try to cut costs on reliable energy infrastructure, you have what happened in California and Texas in terms of blackouts. Like if they admit, hey, solar and wind have been a big failure so far that have caused so much harm, but I have a theory that they're going to be really good in the future, I would listen to them. But when they say, oh, they've been amazing, then if you can't even know the present of these disasters, how can you possibly predict the future? And the fact that solar and wind are viewed as successes and they're constantly being portrayed as cheap, which just always involves ignoring the full system cost. They're like, oh, solar panels are cheap. Yeah, but how much does it cost to incorporate solar panels on a grid so they're reliable? That requires solar panels, transmission lines, backup by natural gas, and then they're cost adding, not cost reducing. So the fact that these are failures now, it should make us very suspicious that they're going to be good in the future. And the fact that they're advocates do not acknowledge their failures now and portray them as successes now, means you're really being duped. And by the way, I put up this website, energytalkingpoints.com. So if people want documentation of these things, it has every issue you can imagine. Just search for it at
I'll put a
energytalkingpoints.com.
link in the description. But Alex, aren't you
Awesome.
being really heartless? Because we see the pictures of the starving polar bears and all of these other species that are going extinct. Aren't we at risk of losing precious animals?
Well, polar bears, I mean, have you seen that meme that says, like, when Al Gore was born, there were only 7,000 polar bears. Now only 40,000 remain. So they keep switching, to your point about what influenced you, right? They like keep switching the disasters all the time. And in my first book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, the first chapter, which you can read for free on Amazon, it documents how these kind of kaleidoscope of catastrophes that they keep predicting and don't happen, and they don't learn any lessons from it because they still believe this dogma that the earth is a delicate nurture. So they just keep expecting catastrophe. So polar bears, yeah, polar bears, there are more of them now. They actually cause a lot of problems. I love polar bears. Like, aesthetically, it's my favorite animal. But it should be weird that we're so obsessed with, oh, this polar bear has to move from one piece of ice to another, and we don't care that 3 billion people have less electricity than a typical American refrigerator. Like, that really shows we don't have a human perspective. But also, there's this weird delicate nurture perspective. Because if I told you, Darren, and you had never had any background, any contamination by the green religion, hey, we're putting a little bit more of a gas in the atmosphere that is a greening gas. So it creates more biomass, and it's a warming gas on a planet at one of its coldest points in history. What is that going to do, all things being equal, for species and biodiversity?
Well,
Don't
yeah.
species like green and warmth?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how could, if it's viewed as all, not that there can't be disruptions depending on the pace, but if it's viewed as all bad, again, that's primitive religion. There is no way, like, the species explosions in the history of this planet often involve very high levels of temperature and CO2, which don't correlate very well historically anyway, but in terms of large scale correlations. But it's crazy that we view it as, oh, this warming, fertilizing gas is going to extinguish all life on Earth, even though life requires warmth and CO2.
So should we stop eating meat? That's another climate change.
Not for that reason. I have a friend who's I eat meat, but I have a friend who's a. This is a really good illustration of how you always want to know the philosophy of somebody. You want to know somebody's environmental philosophy and whether it's pro-human or anti-human before you take any advice from them. This certainly includes scientists. Like, you need to know, are the scientists on our side, or do they believe that our presence on the planet is evil? Because if they believe our presence on the planet is evil, then it doesn't matter how much they know about science. They're just gonna that knowledge will just be applied to anti-human
Hmm.
policy. So this guy, he came to me and he said, "Hey, look, I believe in a totally plant-based diet, but I have no moral objection whatsoever to eating meat. Like, I would, if it was the best thing for me, I would eat goat testicles." This is literally what he said. Like, I'm total, and I said, "Okay, I will listen to you now, right? Because I
Yes.
know that you're not at least you say you're not, and I believe he's not, you're not discriminating against meat because of this anti-human perspective that we have no right to use the rest of nature. You have this analysis." And so that for me is a microcosm of how I filter experts and specialists in general. Is I try to get, do they believe that we should think of the world from a human flourishing perspective, and do they recognize that the world is not delicate nurture, it's what I call wild potential. So it's dynamic, deficient, dangerous, and we need to intelligently impact it. And you find that if you have those filters, like, is their goal to advance human flourishing or eliminate human impact? And do they believe in like the wild potential Earth or the delicate nurture Earth? You're going to filter out almost all experts, but you'll find some who are good. And what
Hmm.
you find, that once you have those filters, you're going to see that so many of these quote scientists that you hear about are really like primitive religious activists who are falsely claiming to speak for all scientists. And one point I make in my next book, which is coming out in April, Fossil Future, which I'm happy to send you, by the way, if you want to read an advanced copy.
Absolutely.
But I talk in the beginning, I introduce what I call the concept of our knowledge system. And what this captures is that when we hear something as the expert view, we are not getting that ourselves from the actual specialist researchers. It is being processed by a system that includes them, but also includes institutions that synthesize what they find out, like the UN and the International Energy Agency, and that disseminate, like the BBC and the New York Times, and then people who are evaluating the issues, including politicians and commentators. And what's happening is it's not that all the researchers are wrong, like they think the world is going to end or they have some informed view about fossil fuels. It's that what they have figured out, or more or less figured out, has been distorted by the knowledge system, by this Korean religion. And that's how you go from climate scientists thinking, yeah, we are going to have some warming impact, we may have to adapt, to the world is going to end, we need to get rid of fossil fuels and nuclear and hydro, and we need only solar. So
Well,
that
and
just shows you how.
humans, right? And humans. Let's curtail the human
Well, yeah,
population.
but that's the implication. But it's the way it's put as, it's literally put as, the scientists tell us we need to get rid of
Right.
fossil fuels, nuclear, and like we need to get rid of fossil fuels and replace them specifically with unreliable solar and wind. Like that should be an indication that this is not something that research scientists are actually saying or are qualified to say. This is a distortion where you're using the prestige of the research scientists to impose your own anti-human evaluation of what we should do going forward.
Well, Alex, I want you to. I was about to ask you to put your optimistic hat on, but I am pretty certain that Americans are much better at that than we Brits. And I think if you consider the fact that today's young people, it's something that I am quite concerned by. They're living their lives. You speak to some school-aged people today, and they will tell you that they are living in a perpetual state of fear, a sort of daily dread of apocalyptic climate change that will see their generation potentially be the last generation to walk a soon-to-be uninhabitable planet. What would your message be, Alex, to the next generation when it comes to climate change?
And it's really sad. One person who's been really good on this is the author Michael Schellenberger, who wrote the book
Yeah.
Apocalypse Never. And he was actually motivated. I think it was one of his kids, like their friends were just literally afraid of this stuff, and it was debilitating. I mean, I would start off with, okay, look, before we talk about the future, let's recognize the world today has never been more livable, including we're safer than ever from climate. So do you understand that? Because if you can understand today's world from a human perspective, and you get rid of this delicate nurture dogma, and you really get that we're masters of climate, it becomes incredibly implausible that, oh, the next amount of CO2 is going to cause a disaster. And that's why so much of the climate catastrophe movement trades on misportraying the current state of the earth. So I've found it, the last couple of years, I've really found it effective to just first establish, okay, today's earth is amazing. We're safer than ever from climate. If we acknowledge that, then we can talk about the future. But we need to understand why it's so amazing. If we understand why it's so amazing, we realize, oh wow, fossil fuels are amazing, and we should expect that the world could get better. And overall, I tell them, look, you are you are inhabiting the greatest world that anyone has ever inhabited. And so it's, no, I was lucky. I mean, I'm born in 1980. I feel very fortunate to have been born in 1980. But if you're born in 2000, you're a hell of a lot luckier than I am in terms of your opportunity. And also, the poorest people in the world are much, much luckier than they used to be. I mean, there's still a lot of work to do there, and there's a lot of reform that needs to happen in terms of governments, and people need to empower with energy. But life expectancy is going up around the world. And so really what we've done is we've taken a naturally barely livable planet and we've made it unnaturally livable, largely using fossil fuels. And so if you recognize that, then you're going to be optimistic about the future. And fortunately, all the facts I'm citing about the current state of the planet, those are undeniable. The only people who deny it or distort it, they are either ignorant or they're not looking at the planet from a pro-human perspective. They're looking at it from an anti-human impact perspective. So I find that if I talk to people, it's not that hard to turn this around. So it's very distressing that this exists. But where I'm optimistic in terms of the culture is it's not that hard to dislodge these things. And what I'm finding, and what I call energy humanists are finding, is there are people open to these arguments, and the other side doesn't have any answer. So that's the interesting thing. So we have this growing movement of energy humanists who are really looking at the big picture when it comes to climate. And nobody really has an answer to us. All they can do is kind of do ad hominem attacks or straw man attacks, so distorting our views. But the more prominent we become, the harder that is to do. And then what happens is people say, well, I don't agree with Alex about everything, but he has a point. And then once you start to break that moral monopoly of the climate catastrophe side, once it has to exist on its own merits, it's done because it has no merits. It's a laughably irrational view that trades on fake prestige that it claims from science and doesn't deserve, and these false primitive religious views about the earth that are pretty easy to dislodge. So I am optimistic that the culture can change pretty quickly because these views are so irrational and so dependent on the unearned status they have. And it's part of why I'm grateful to talk to you and to other rational people because, yeah, I think we really have a shot at winning on this issue. There are other issues that I think are harder to change minds on than this one. And people might think that's weird because they think this is nobody will change their mind. But I have a lot of experience changing people's minds on this issue, including my own.
That's a really good way to end today. If can people pre-order your next book, by the way, or is it?
Yeah, they can. So it is coming out Earth. I don't know if you have Earth Day the same day we do. Yes, but it's Earth
I
Week
guess so.
2022. So it is April 19th. So they can get it on Amazon if they want
Great.
my
I'll put a
first book.
link in the description as well.
Yeah, that's the most important. You can read my first book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. You can read that partially for free. And then the resource I generally recommend, the two resources are energytalkingpoints.com, which is this free resource that has talking points on every issue that you can imagine, and it's growing. And there's also a newsletter you can subscribe to. And then also, I'm very active on Twitter, as I know you are. And so, if people are interested in Twitter, like I really try to post a lot of good stuff on Twitter, and it's how I meet a lot of really interesting people. So I think if you can avoid Twitter addiction, which I have some good tricks for, Twitter is an amazing place to meet like-minded people or even to change minds. So
Yeah, I
at
tell
Alex
you,
Epstein.
on this channel, we don't often speak highly of twitter.com.
Oh,
I'll
is
tell
that
you that
right?
much. Yeah,
You have a
it's a
lot of
very
followers on Twitter.
anti-conservative channel
I know
into
our next show will be a debate on
on
Twitter, and
Twitter. Yeah,
I'll be paid by Jack
absolutely.
Dorsey to take up his man.
Yes, exactly. He's looking more like Rasputin, isn't he, these days? He's got that sort of straggly beard. But anyway, that's a whole another show altogether. Right, Alex, thank you very much for giving up your time today. And as I say, all those links will be in the description. So cheers very much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Darren.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Reasoned is a grassroots organisation that's entirely funded by people like yourself. So if you're in a position to do so, please do consider supporting us by clicking the link to the side there.